what are the best examples of high dynamic range in gaming today? Here at DF, we often talk about the 4K experience, the resolutions, and the frame rates, but a major revolution in visual standards this generation is HDR, specifically HDR10 as used on console. Recently we've had some amazing examples, Crackdown 3, Metro Exodus, and even Sekiro, all look stunning. And in fact, it's surprising how many games support it as standard these days. And so supposing you've just picked up an Ultra HD TV or are planning to, today I'll be picking the best showcases. And to help me along, I've invited none other than John Linneman.
Hey Tom, how's it going?
Yeah, pretty good.
I think we should probably touch on why we're suddenly talking about HDR here. You just got a new display, right?
Yeah, there's a bit of a selfish motive to this. Picked up an LG OLED, the B8 model, and
Excellent.
I spent the whole, weekend just sort of catching up, and man, it's a real revelation, some of these games. It definitely gives you a way to see these games through completely new eyes, some more so than others, which I suppose is what we're going to cover today.
Absolutely. So yeah, I've been playing with HDR for a while. Support has been a little spotty as of late, I feel, but there's still a lot of great examples out there. And yeah, Tom, why don't you kick it off with your first thoughts here?
So we're just going to pick through a couple of our favorites. I guess we'll take it in turns, but I bet we'll have a huge overlap.
No doubt.
First thing to note though, of course, this video will be encoded in the HEVC format, and ideally you'll be watching it in high dynamic range. So if you want to see this video at pristine quality, be sure to check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net. You can get the source file there. Just stick that on a USB stick, plug it into a supporting TV, and you'll get a great sense of what we're talking about. If not, there are other options. You can watch this video on a HDR supporting phone like the S8, S9, S10 range from Samsung, or of course the iPhone 10, which has HDR support as well. And if you don't, well, it'll just be tone mapped down to SDR and it'll still look good. So I guess I'll lead with the absolute best showcase I found out of the, say, 15 games I tried, which is Horizon Zero Dawn.
Oh yes.
It's almost like it was built to showcase HDR from the start. There's an opening cave area where you get a great contrast between the spots touched by daylight and the shadows. And then on top of that, you got things like the focus view, which gives you a kind of neon lighting to everything. And that neon, it's a perfect tone for HDR and it adds real pop to it. And even when you kind of emerge outdoors, the lighting, it works beautifully because of the setting of the sun, which is a major point with how HDR is presented as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great things about it, and this is something shared with a lot of HDR games, is if you look at the scene as a whole, a lot of it will fall within standard dynamic range, and that's how it should be. And then you have the areas that push out. And in the case of Horizon Zero Dawn, obviously things like the neon that you mentioned and flames and all that, but the sky, the use of sky, they have this brilliant volumetric cloud system, but then they apply the correct brightness values to it so that when you're playing in HDR, like and you're standing in sort of the shadowed woods and you're looking out to the sky, it explodes with brightness before you. I guess it's hitting a high nit level technically, and then your TV will sort of tone map that to whatever. I'm not sure exactly what their target is for maximum nits though, but either way, you know, things like the sky really stand out. Actually,
that's a good point. In Horizon, they don't actually give you a settings slider for the max brightness or peak brightness. Some games do, some games don't. Generally speaking, it's a good policy to have, you know, that option just in case you wanted to get that crowd-pleasing max brightness mode. But what Guerrilla Games has done is calibrated it themselves to give you one of the best results out of the box.
For me, though, then I would say still kind of at the top of my list has to be Gran Turismo Sport.
Yes.
Which I know that they poured a lot of effort and time into researching HDR to ensure a very forward-looking presentation. You know, it does actually have options to adjust it, and I believe they even said that they were targeting up to 10,000 nits, which is just insane.
Wow.
And I'm not, you know, I'm but either way, you're not going to get that. But the effect that they're going for here is they're sort of targeting that photorealism. There are a lot of bright spots within each scene, as you would expect, but there's this very smooth gradient from the brightest highlights down to the deepest blacks, and it's the combination of the two, this sort of contrast between those deep colors and the intense highlights, And in a racing game, there's a lot of intense highlights present. So the lighting in general is superb, and the physically based rendering that they have going on, the materials quality, and then that combines with this HDR. So like cars, for instance, the tail lights and the headlights are extremely intense. The values and the overall maximum brightness differs between the different type of light. So those that use LEDs, for instance, do appear more vibrant and brighter than some of the more traditional filaments within there. So there's a difference there. Then there's the sky, of course, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Or even in the case of, there's the stadium track, and when you race that at night, you're in this bright stadium, there's lights all around, and the value assigned to these is extremely intense. Yet you can still see the starry night sky. And on, a TV with a good contrast ratio, you really get this great contrast between the super dark black sky and these intense lights. Somehow they're able to do this artistically in a way that's sort of just suitably realistic. You know what I mean? Like the shades and the hues and the brightness, it appears very, very realistic to the eye. It's the kind of lighting that you start to catch yourself being like, okay, this feels familiar in a way, as if, this is what I might have seen here in a way. And you don't get that at all when playing an SDR.
That is kind of the litmus test, I think. When you switch back to SDR, you find yourself recognizing how much of a change it made. It's absolutely a must. If you get a TV with HDR support, you've got to check this out. I guess moving on from that, my next choice is Resident Evil 2 and by extension 7. It is absolutely stunning. As a show of commitment from the developer, you do get all the settings you need, whether you want that blinding light from everything or you want it more subdued and natural. Pretty much every game I've got captured here will just go for the default settings. But yeah, it's got a great opener for this. You've got the torchlights used heavily as a mechanic through these dark alleyways and corridors, and that means it kind of feeds into the gameplay a lot more than most of the other examples here. You get a finer gradient between light and dark, which you wouldn't get in SDR, and all told, it was the game I felt the most moving to SDR that I've lost something. I got the biggest sort of withdrawal symptom from moving to SDR. So yeah, in that sense, it's the game with the biggest improvement if you're going to check this effect out.
That is interesting you say that, and you're not wrong. The HDR implementation is good in that game, in Resident Evil 2, but I had some complaints with the color grading that they used in certain spots, or some of their choices. Like early on in the game, for instance, when you first arrive at the police station, you go into that little hallway.
Yes, yeah.
Crawl under the door. As soon as you get in there, they raise the black level up significantly,
right,
which creates a sort of gray, washed out look. And this does exist in SDR as well, but because the controls for brightness change when you switch to SDR, you can kind of negate that, but at the same time, it's still, you end up kind of crushing other things later on, so there's not really a great way to get that perfect. And that's something that really annoyed me with that game, is while in general it looks great, there's just a lot of scenes that I felt where I didn't really love the choices they made, and I had to wonder if it was just to ensure that shadow detail was visible on a wide range of displays, since some of the older LCDs, for instance, may struggle with that. But either way, it's good, but yeah, I have some complaints.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can definitely see the influence of the developer, custom tweaking it. And so it's not just like an on-off switch for a game to just have this. It has to be tailored carefully. But overall, I still got the sense that this was a good use of the effect, given the type of game it is.
I guess for me then, the next one I would mention as a top one is possibly a little strange to some people, but I'm going with Crackdown 3. I know this isn't a hugely popular game, but I admit it, I actually loved it, and I actually did finish it, and I absolutely love the HDR implementation in that. I think it's actually one of the best I've seen. They do this wonderful job with these super vibrant cityscapes. So during the day, of course, you have the bright sunshine and the light reflecting off buildings and the excellent lighting overall, and it's very intense and bright. But as the sun sets and the city comes to life once again, they sort of enable all these neon lights everywhere, sort of like their own cyberpunky looking vision, I guess you could say. And it's this combination of the intense neon lights and the darkness of the city that I think really works. I mean, we saw something similar in Infamous Second Son and their HDR implementation, but I feel that was actually, I think they went too far and they sort of crushed shadow detail, and it didn't quite work for me. I think this looks much better and it feels much more natural. It overall. And interestingly, those guys, from what I heard, actually paid attention to the HDR findings of Evil Boris, who we had do a couple pieces for our site before as well. And hopefully, again, he's like the HDR expert in that sense. So, he's done a lot of good write-ups on that stuff, and they actually sort of read up on that and followed some of those guidelines as well, which that's an example of the community actually contributing back. And yeah, it was effective. The results are excellent. So if you are looking for a really cool HDR experience that you might not have expected, I think that's one of them.
That is a great showcase in its own right. Just go in expecting a very extreme end of the spectrum when it comes to how it's presented. But yeah, for my third choice, it's got to go with a very recent title, Metro Exodus. This again ticks the boxes that you'd expect in terms of presenting huge contrast between dark and light. They open with that cave section, which appears, extremely dark normally, and there's not much of a gradient between the tones of light and dark. But with HDR enabled, that just comes out beautifully, and you get the screen space effects over your visor, which kind of refract that light as well, which again plays into it. And then you emerge outside and you get that effect in the sky. The skybox is much better defined and the sun in it is crisper. And I didn't actually have a chance to switch off the effect in the end, but it does feel like a huge upgrade over what I tried when I was putting the face-off together. Yeah, absolutely, it's a standout game. And not to mention the fact that what would usually be the HUD elements, health bars and the gauges and meters, are actually presented on your hands. And those have a kind of backlighting to them, which stands out especially. So yeah, a really good application of it, and it ties right into the gameplay as well, again.
So yeah, Metro is a pretty cool choice, I agree. The other one I wanted to mention then real quick is Tetris Effect, because that was one of my favorite games from last year actually. And yeah, that's basically falling blocks with psychedelic backgrounds. And obviously because of all the particles and effects they throw around, they just kind of go nuts with the high intensity highlights, which then, are contrasted against the very rich and deep colored backgrounds. And it's that mix of intensity there that I think really works, and it just looks great. It's exactly what you want from that type of experience, the combination of the music with high intensity visuals. It was a good fit, so yeah, that's another one that's high on my list.
Yeah, Tetris Effect, stunning, loads of great particle effects, and definitely ties into Mizuguchi's synesthesia style. But yeah, there's only a couple of runners-up for me, and I can run through them very quickly. I think it'd be impossible to overlook Forza Horizon 4.
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
Which, they absolutely nailed it for this one, and you've got all the controls to push the nits level as high as you like, which I really appreciate. And also you get the same effect as Gran Turismo Sport, in that when you go to the over-the-top view of the car, you can see all the reflections and the light bouncing off the body of the car. You can still get a good sense of the peak brightness from the skies, which is a great look. The other one actually goes back to the launch of the PS4, which is Resogun. Again, much like Tetris Effect, you get a great use of particle effects.
I didn't actually know that they patched in HDR into that game. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's retrofitted and it's absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, it's much like Tetris Effect. It's not gunning for any photorealistic ideals. It's definitely a crowd pleaser. But yes, I think that about covers some of the main highlights, but of course there are many others we can touch on. I'm sure you've got plenty you'd recommend in the comments below. The God of War reboot, Spider-Man are among them. In the meantime, if you did like or enjoyed this video in any way, please give us a like or subscribe to support what we do at Digital Foundry, and to see this video at its source file quality and to get the download of the HEVC, be sure to check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net. To get in touch with either John or myself, you can do exactly that through Twitter. Thanks for joining me, John.
No problem, Tom.
And from the both of us, thanks for watching.